Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're breaking down the mechanics and, honestly, the sheer madness behind Jordan Belfort's rise to infamy. We're going to look at exactly how a kid from Queens managed to build a massive financial empire entirely on a foundation of cold calls and false promises, and how the system finally caught up with him. So let's just dive right into this really startling paradox. Here is a guy who built a totally fraudulent empire, absolutely devastated people's lives, and yet somehow walked away as a pop culture icon. It's a story of incredible ambition and devastating greed. And, it gives us a pretty unsettling look at how society often rewards the very people who exploit it. The numbers here are just staggering. So to really understand the wolf, we have to start at the very beginning. Going from a working-class kid in 1962 Queens to a scrappy teenager making 20 grand just selling Italian ices, Belfort proved super early on that he had this immense raw ambition. I mean, think about it. Most 16-year-olds would have blown that kind of cash on a car, right? But Belfort was already thinking way bigger. He actually enrolled in dental school, which brings us to a pivotal moment that perfectly captures his whole mindset. The literal moment Belfort heard this quote from the dean on his very first day of classes, he just stood up, nodded, and walked right out the door. It brilliantly illustrates that his sole driving motivation was pure wealth. He wasn't there to clean teeth or help people, he was there to get rich. And the second he realized dentistry wasn't his fast track to a fortune, he didn't waste another breath. After dropping out, he tried his hand at a door-to-door meat and seafood business. And while that eventually went bankrupt, despite pulling in a really impressive 100 grand a month in sales at one point, he realized his true superpower. He discovered he didn't actually need a good product. He just needed to sell. Whether it was flash frozen steaks, surfboards, or stocks, the product was completely secondary to the pitch itself. The ultimate salesman had officially arrived. From there, Belfort took that raw talent straight to Wall Street, landing a gig at LF Rothschild, where he learned exactly how the big markets moved. But after losing that entry-level job during the Black Monday crash of 1987, he stumbled into the unregulated, wildly lucrative world of penny stocks. He quickly learned these were basically pink sheet garbage companies that no serious broker would ever touch. But they offered massive 50% commissions. He realized he could use his fast talking to pitch huge upsides to unsuspecting people, securing massive payouts for himself without needing any kind of fancy Wall Street degree. Which leads us to part one, building the boiler room. Taking that raw sales talent and literally weaponizing it, Belfort teamed up with Danny Porish in 1989 to launch Stratton Oakmont. Now, despite that very prestigious-sounding name, this was just an unregulated firm operating out of a strip mall in Long Island. He didn't want experienced, independent thinkers. Instead, he recruited aggressive, hungry misfits, bartenders, neighborhood dropouts, and he trained them in this intense psychological pressure cooker method he called straight-line persuasion. The whole goal was to guide a prospect from hello to where do I send the check without leaving any room for doubt. But who exactly were they selling to? Well, they definitely weren't targeting savvy Wall Street elites. Instead, they went right after working-class retirees and desperate parents. These were the everyday investors that traditional Wall Street basically ignored. Stratton Oakmont sold them this false sense of certainty, wrapped in extreme urgency and backed by completely made-up financial projections. It was, at its core, a predatory system designed to exploit people's hope. Okay, moving right into part two, anatomy of a pump and dump. Let's break down exactly how this infamous pump and dump scheme actually worked. First, they would buy massive blocks of dirt cheap shares. Second, the sales floor turned into a relentless hype machine, flooding the market with high-pressure cold calls. Third, all that manufactured excitement would artificially spike the stock's price. And finally, Belfort and his inner circle would dump their own shares right at the top, cashing out and leaving the everyday investors holding the bag with absolutely nothing. It's a vicious cycle Stratton Oakmont repeated daily with fake companies and eventually even with real IPOs. You really have to contrast these two completely different worlds to grasp the whole picture. On one side, you have the absolute devastation of his victims, veterans and retirees losing their entire life savings. And on the other side, the grotesque excess of his boiler room. It was this crazy blur of screaming phones, $2,000 suits, champagne literally overflowing into fax machines, and rampant drug use. Fear and loyalty were the ultimate currency there, and the entire culture was driven by unyielding, bottomless greed. As the millions kept rolling in, Belfort basically became a cult leader in an Armani suit. We're talking mansions, Lamborghinis, Rolexes. But as the firm grew, so did the massive headache of hiding all that illicit wealth. He used a super complex web of couriers, even going so far as to smuggle cash stuffed in envelopes sewn into a housekeeper's bra. He set up offshore shell companies in Geneva, hid accounts under a UK aunt's name. Belfort liked to call it asset protection. The FBI, naturally, called it money laundering. Now for part 3. The empire unravels. You see, that extreme recklessness soon bled right out of his professional life and into his personal life. In June of 1996, while heavily under the influence of quaaludes and explicitly ignoring his own captain's warnings, Belfort forced his yacht into a severe Mediterranean storm. The yacht completely sank, taking over $2 million in jewelry and narcotics straight to the bottom of the sea. They actually had to be rescued by the Italian Navy. He survived, sure, but his aura of invincibility was shattering. Meanwhile, back in New York, the walls were rapidly closing in. FBI agent Gregory Coleman smelled blood in the water. He started tracking these highly suspicious withdrawal patterns. Basically, Belfort was pulling out cash in increments of exactly $50,000 using cashier's checks, and those funds were being laundered through casinos and art galleries. Coleman knew exactly what that kind of pattern meant. In October 1996, the FBI finally raided Stratton Oakmont. But honestly, the truly fatal mistake wasn't even the raid itself. In early 1997, while he was actively under investigation and had been explicitly ordered not to move funds, Belfort wired $2 million to Switzerland. And worse for him, the conversation about that transfer was recorded on a wiretap. That single transaction was the loose thread that unraveled his entire empire, leading to its total collapse by late 1998. So here we are at part 4, flippin' on the pack. Staring down the barrel of up to 30 years in federal prison for wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering, the ultimate salesman decided to sell his final and most valuable asset, information. To save his own skin, he wore a wire and flipped on his own people. This cooperation led to the indictment of over 30 employees, partners, and friends. We're talking about people who joined his firm right out of high school and loyally followed his playbook, only to be handed over to the feds like receipts. Wildly enough, some of them ended up serving more prison time than he did. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, How Crime Actually Pays. For orchestrating a massive, sprawling financial fraud that ruined countless lives all across the country, Belfort served just 22 months. And guys, this wasn't hard time. It was a minimum security facility with no fences where the guards didn't even carry guns. He basically spent his days playing tennis in the mornings and lifting weights in the afternoons. While he was inside, he actually ended up rooming with comedian Tommy Chong. Chong was super amused by Belfort's wild stories of drugs, yachts, and bags of cash, and told him he had to write them all down. This resulted in his highly unapologetic 2007 memoir. There was zero remorse in it, just endless tales of excess. And of course, that book eventually caught the eye of Hollywood, leading to a massive global blockbuster directed by Martin Scorsese and starring Leonardo DiCaprio. The fraudster had successfully rebranded into an entertainer. And this right here really highlights the supreme injustice of the whole situation. As part of his sentencing, Belfort was ordered to pay $110 million in restitution to his victims. Yet to this very day, only a tiny fraction of that money has ever actually reached the people he scammed. The rest just kind of vanished into legal loopholes, trusts, and offshore accounts. Today, the contrast is just stark and honestly, a bit disturbing. While a teacher who lost her retirement or a family who had to remortgage their home remains totally devastated and waiting for justice, Belfort is out there thriving. He wears that wolf moniker like a badge of honor instead of a scar. He travels the world as this wealthy motivational speaker, a sales coach, literally teaching the exact same mechanics of influence that he used to build his scam in the first place. Belfort once claimed that sure, he was guilty of being greedy, but that deep down, everybody else is too. And you know, that really leaves us to reflect on society's own complicity in how we glorify white-collar criminals. Consider how easily a story of catastrophic financial ruin was transformed into a celebrated pop culture phenomenon. Did we actually want him punished for the lives he destroyed, or did we secretly just want to be him? Think about that for a second. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.